Brussell in Carmel, California. It's tape number 444, June the 6th, 1980, and it's side one of the tape.
With a little help from my friends. I get high with a little help from my friends.
I like that song. It's written by the Beatles, sung by the Bee Gees, this particular record. In times when the world goes totally insane and crazy, and it is insane right now. It has been for a long time, but it seems to be getting even worse. It helps to have good friends and good family, and I'm lucky with that. I think the holiday season around November and December, and also the summer, May and June, is a time where many of us in the family and friends get together and feel the warmth and contact of people that share the common interests, pursue goals of exposing, understanding, exploring, or just loving each other. It's a good time of a year, even though things are pretty bad outside. I think the world events are shaping up similar to 1914 and 1939, just prior to the outbreak of World War II. Armies were getting together, ready to carve up Europe, displace people, make war on the continent of Europe. We felt the bombs at Pearl Harbor. Some people felt them. We didn't in the United States, actually. But Hitler invaded Poland, and then the Grand World War II is on its way. We're almost there now with the weapons manufacturing lining people in countries against each other, causing civil wars, hatreds, animosities, border wars, and goodness knows where it can all lead. In the end, I'm sure that there'll be certain bonds of people or decency that will remain, but in the meantime, many are going to have to die and suffer in the process. I don't see any way to stop it. I really don't. I saw a good movie 2 weeks ago. I didn't get to share with you last week on the tape. It's called The Tin Drum. Many of you live in larger cities might see it. If it doesn't come to your city where you have foreign pictures, it was made in Germany, you can get the book. The book came out quite a while ago. It's written by Gunnar Grass. It comes in paperback. And it's an excellent book, and the movie won the Academy Award for the Best Foreign Picture this year. The movie is about a little boy, 3 years old, who attends his birthday party. The party has no children. They're grown-ups drinking and a lot of sexual play and implied callousness or degeneration, and Oscar decides that he doesn't want to grow up, that he has his little drum for his birthday present, and he will remain a dwarf. Now, it has been discovered that dwarfism has some psychological as well as physical causes. There's been a lot of investigation into that. But whether it's symbolic or actually the truth, Oscar stays small. He wants to stay the size of a 3-year-old. He doesn't want to be like the grown-ups. And if he stays little and cute, he won't have the responsibilities or the temptations that the grown-ups have. And that, of course, is the first mistake. There's no such thing as staying little and infantile unless you're put away as a basket case, which he was for a while. But in the end, his worst punishment is to be released, to have to accept responsibility when he's 30 years old for what he didn't do from the time he was young until he was older. But he goes out into the world as a child, even though he matures physically and is able to even have a child. He looks like a child, and he thinks that that will keep him from making decisions, and that's wrong. Then his toy supplier, the man who gives him his drums when the other drums break, is a Jew who is murdered by the Nazis when they come into Poland and into power, so that the supply is cut off. The Jew can't go to Oscar's mother's funeral, and his best friend, his ally, to supply those childish needs, specifically to replace the toy drums, is gone. Then he joins the army of Adolf Hitler to entertain the troops. But that doesn't help either. When you play the side with the enemy, whether you are an Alan Lowenstein or a Vernon Jordan or Faye Stender, it doesn't work. They'll get you anyway. They don't respect you. Better stand up, be a man or woman, and don't play it both sides from the middle, because they'll wipe you out anyway, as if you're so much dirt. So he joins the little midget circus to entertain Hitler's troops, and that doesn't work. And then he's taken away on a train. He's put in a mental hospital, and the movie ends with his being on a train going away. In the book, the worst fate that can happen to him happens in the hospital, where they find out that the charges against him for murder weren't true, and they're to release him. And they look at him, in Gunnar Grass's book, there's a section on his 30th birthday, and they say, "You're 30 now, Oscar. It's time you got some sense into your head. Life begins at 30. and he was afraid to be acquitted. He said, don't take me out of the mental hospital. I've got this lovely bed. I've got this lovely room. And he didn't want the responsibility for his actions. And the cruelest thing they could do would be to release him and put him out in the world to have to make his decisions. So there's no such thing as running away. There's no such thing as being infantile. There's no such thing as playing with the enemy. None of those things work, and it's important for young people taking these tapes or listening to these tapes on radio to know that if you believe in something, stay with it and fight it. Don't turn the other way. No matter what excuse you want to make, it won't work for you anyway. So just grow up. As soon as you see the light, grow up and take your responsibility for your own actions or your own government, and don't hide under infantile ways of playing with toys. Doesn't matter what the toys are, the recreational diversion toys we have today, or flicking the tube and watching the diversionary movies or the athletics and so forth. Take responsibility for yourself, because eventually, at some stage, you're going to have to do it anyway or else be slaughtered. It's a wonderful movie, The Tin Drum. See it if you can. Make a point of seeing it. I didn't mention the shooting of Vernon and Jordan on last week's tape. It had just happened, and there wasn't enough information in, and of course, it's just a continuation of killing black leaders and organizers, as I say, even though they play the team. He isn't dead, but he could have been left for dead. He's in pain, and he'll survive, but the intent was to silence him and hurt him, and they certainly did hurt him. He's in a lot of pain. The similarities to the other murders and assassinations are outrageous, even though the national news media says there's no comparison to the John Kennedy assassination or Martin Luther King. They found 2 bullet fragments, 2 .30.06 shell casings were recovered from the grass, but they don't have a suspect, but only 1 gunman. They have 3 pads of grass that were matted down to suggest that 3 people were in different places, either to assist with the getaway or whatever, but they still continue to say it was 1 gunman, 2 casings, and 3 pads of grass that were matted. Jordan did all, in quotes, the right things except investigating the man Whitney Young, whose civil rights movement he took over. He took over as director of the Urban League in 1972. Whitney Young was murdered in Africa. He allegedly had a heart attack. The circumstances were mysterious then. He drowned in the water, and instead of investigating that, Jordan took over, assumed it was a natural death, even though there was a question at the time about the autopsy, opening the coffin and investigating whether he was poisoned before he went into the water or what happened to him. He took over just as Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson took over from Martin Luther King. They were on the balcony when Martin Luther King was murdered. They've kept quiet. They have worked side by side with the assassins, and someday they'll just be wiped out anyway. 2-bit cowards playing the game. Jordan worked for all the right companies. He was on the board of the American Express, the Bankers Trust, the Celanese Corporation, the racist J.C. Penney, Xerox Corporation, Reynolds Industry. He helped foundations like the John Hay Whitney Foundation, the CIA, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Taconic Foundation, and the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation, which is okay. His wife has multiple sclerosis. But it doesn't matter who you're with and what board you're on. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he was speaking, it's a scene of the Ku Klux Klan recently. It borders Ohio and Michigan, where the Klan are rising. And when he goes there to give an address and he talks about racism in America and how our rich country cannot support this kind of racism and how the inflation is hurting minorities and so forth, he's shot down just like anybody else. If he talks about problems in this country, it doesn't matter who he knew or who he sat with. It still is a question of not wanting this man to go any further or to give public speeches on the conditions of racism in America. Just the night before Jordan was almost murdered, I was at a dinner party at Century City Hotel in Los Angeles. Mayor Tom Bradley, the black mayor of Los Angeles, was sitting at the table right next to me, and his bodyguard had the seat right to my right at a small table. There were tables of 10 or 12, and we were at the table right across where he could see Tom Bradley. And I was talking about the problem of security of guarding a black mayor in the United States when the intent is to wipe out all black leaders, and how does one man plus the hotel at Century City bodyguard system go about even thinking, anticipating the kind of people that would take an aim at the mayor. And it's interesting we were talking about that because Tom Bradley was going the next week down to Argentine to be an honored guest of the Argentine government, and I just shuddered. I could see him having one of those Adlai Stevenson lunches, and I told the bodyguard, or a Woodrow Wilson apple pie, or J. Edgar Hoover chemical toothpaste, or so forth, when he travels, and then they didn't have to shoot him. Within 3 years he'd have cancer and he could die. He gave me his card to send him some information about the killing of black leaders, or American white leaders for that matter, and we talked about security at the dinner party, and the next day, as I say, Jordan was shot. Sitting at the table with Mayor Tom Bradley were Mr. and Mrs. Roy Ashe. He is the head of Litton Industries, and Litton Industries has been documented as working with the Central Intelligence Agency as a conduit to put the Nazis into power in Greece, put in the military junta, and also James Earl Ray, the man who allegedly shot Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee, was at the shipyards owned in Mississippi by Litton Industries and picked up money, or was a conduit through Litton Industries. So I tried to say to the bodyguard, here is your boss, sitting next to people who have never yet been cleared of links of killing a black leader in this country, so that even though Tom Bradley sits next to these people, does he have any idea what the price of the power is to be the mayor of a city of Los Angeles, and who you have to mingle with socially, and the risks you have to take. Getting back to the Jordan case, there were riots and fire bombings in Indiana just a week before he was shot. Mayor Leo Sullivan said there was a fire bomb that was thrown through his bedroom window. This is in Washington, Indiana. There were union riots, race riots, and bombings, the Railroad Brotherhood, and so forth, strikes, similar to Birmingham, Alabama, and the street fights and scenes before Martin Luther King came down there to try to raise the wages of a few black people and give them an equal share of the American pie. When leaders get in that kind of activity and try to work with labor, that's when they're gunned down, not when they sit on the board of directors of corporations or wine and dine with the intelligence community, but when they try to make changes. There are other articles about the Jordan shooting from the New York Times. Clue fails in Jordan shooting. The clues fail because they want them to fail. The only suspect was released and let out of town without the sheriffs even telling the local FBI or police department that they let this party go. The FBI changed one little way. They said that they're investigating a possible conspiracy. It used to be that there was no conspiracy. The first remark after John Kennedy was killed was no conspiracy, J. Edgar Hoover said, and even Ramsey Clark, who's now working over in Iran, said immediately after Martin Luther King was killed there was no conspiracy, even though they didn't have an inkling of a suspect at the time. This is the usual line. Now they're granting there may be a conspiracy, that there were a couple of bullets. They're trying to fit them into a ricocheted bullet, which would make it one person, because more than one would be a conspiracy. So the physical evidence is being rearranged. They can't account for the extra matting in the grass unless one man was so nervous he went back and forth to different positions. The police are hunting, according to news reports, for a lone gunman. The FBI suspects a conspiracy. The case of Jordan took place right outside the Marriott Hotel. Also, that Marriott chain was involved with Arthur Bremer, who stayed at a Marriott Hotel in Maryland shortly before George Wallace was shot. William Webster of the FBI is looking into the fact. He said apparently more than one person was involved, and of course the local police are discounting that there were 3 tamped down areas of grass and the double shells and so forth, and they're just saying, well, the shell split in the air and ricocheted, so it entered 2 places. It wasn't 2 gunmen, it just entered 2 places, and they're trying to remove the many bullets into the single bullet theory and the many people into one person, and the local authorities are trying to clean this up. A Fort Wayne, Indiana, UPI story, June the 1st, no significant parallels to the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in Memphis, Tennessee. Of course, that Martha Coleman said that she couldn't possibly be involved in the shooting of Vernon Jordan. She only knew him 2 hours. That's the kind of logic you get in the mass media putting this kind of a story out. It'd be worse than if she knew him a whole period of years, but she still could be a spy or a plant. But to only know somebody 2 hours, to take him to the house for 15 minutes to have a cup of coffee and then leave there get out of the car at the Marriott Hotel, and then he is shot, and she was sequestered away, and now the police and the FBI are trying to put together what she's saying and see if they should give it to a grand jury. If you're interested in the killing of black leaders, you may go back, if you don't have my tape, 338, that's in July 1978, almost 2 years ago. I have a little map there of regional planning for genocide and some references, the King Alfred Research Newsletter that comes out of Florida, the book The Man Who Cried I Am by John Williams. In the back of the book, The Man Who Cried I Am, there's a memo from the FBI, the CIA, and the Department of Justice briefly saying there are 12 major minority organizations and they are familiar to 22 million people. Dossiers have been compiled on the leaders of the organizations. They can be studied in Washington. The dossiers are complete. The approach of black leaders, if you need to use them, put them in government posts, make them ambassadors, primarily African countries, and let them be visible as leaders until it's time to get rid of them. They listed 12 organizations that had to have the leaders killed, including the National Urban League that Mr. Jordan was president of. That was one of his organizations, and I'm sure the Urban League now will fall apart. That was number 10 on the list out of 12 to get rid of, and the others are already completely broken up. Then it goes on to say at the appropriate time designated by the president, the leaders of these organizations are to be detained only when it's clear that they cannot prevent the emergency. They're going to round up all the blacks. There will be cities where the minority will put up in the streets a good fight, and this is such as took place in Miami recently. There's a desperate and dangerous will, but they earmarked areas of the eastern seaboard, the deep south, the Great Lakes region, and so forth, and went on to say that 40 to 50% of the white population would never engage in stopping the emergency of getting rid of the minority, that the armed forces around the world would take care of them, that law enforcement officials would work, and the document says we're confident the minority could not hold any city it took for more than a few hours. They lack weapons, facility, and logistics, and after the Korean War or during it, they decided to put many minority members in the armed forces where combat is likely to take place and they could be eliminated. At the end of the report signed by the Secretary of Defense, it said that there are approximately 9 million objects, that means 9 million blacks, or 1,500,000 born each year. Production could not dispose of the containers, which proved a bottleneck. In other words, they're procreating too fast. That was 20 years ago when they began to study the problem. We suggest the vaporization technique be employed to overcome production problems inherent in King Alfred, signed by the Secretary of Defense. Now, a lot of people believe that this book, The Man Who Cried I Am, is fiction, but I had an interesting experience with a friend of mine, a black man, who left his trunk and belongings at my home while he was over in Sweden at the university getting a degree, and it turned cold there in the winter, and he asked me to send some winter clothes. I had the keys to his trunk, and the winter clothes were on the top of the clothing in case he stayed there for the winter. And I went into the trunk deeper than the winter clothing. I shouldn't have done it. This man had traveled all over Europe, and when I went deeper into the clothing, along there was a copy of the King Alfred plan, not photographed. It was a document from the Defense Department. It was the actual document, and it wasn't a copy taken from John Williams' book at all. If you've seen government documents enough and studied them like I have, you know that he had a copy of the original King Alfred plan, that it is real, just as the COINTEL program was real. It's interesting, the same party was in Europe getting a degree, and he turned in a paper thinking he would get a doctor's degree, and the paper disappeared. And he blamed the FBI office in Los Angeles and people that were close to the FBI and me of interrupting his career, and he had to rewrite a paper. It wasn't copied, and he stayed 1 extra year abroad because the work that he had done had been destroyed and taken. And he fingered a certain man, Wes Graff, who was about third under J. Edgar Hoover in the Western Division, who was close to members of my family, as being somebody who interfered with what he was doing. Well, we had no way to prove it, but later, just this last year, the articles came out about the FBI interfering with the rights of a white woman and a black friend. I'm talking about the actress. There were documents from 1969 through 1972 by John Mitchell, Richard Kleindienst, the FBI, Jean Seberg, the actress, and the rumors and the stories they told because she was helping black people, Black Panthers, and so forth, and they were on her tail and harassing her and lying about her. And these documents that were released recently about Jean Seberg were done through Wes Graff of the FBI, the very man that we suspected of interfering with our privacy and our rights back in that time period, and this was in 1970, the same time period that Jean Seberg was getting the treatment for befriending a black person or working with them. The Central Intelligence Agency and the FBI were on her tail, and Wes Graff of the FBI was the gentleman involved in these newly released documents. And it was Wes Graff, the FBI man, who had been in my home in Carmel, that we had suspected had interfered with our privacy and our rights. My friend had a copy of the King Alfred plan, and I saw it, and he knew and I knew, and this was back in 1969, 1970, that all of the leaders, the black leaders, would be slain. And, of course, as I say, number 10 on the list out of 12 was the very organization that Mr. Vernon Jordan, took over when Whitney Young was murdered. And they tried to wipe him, Jordan, out now. I didn't say much on the tape about another woman I briefly mentioned, Faye Stender, who was found dead in Hong Kong, allegedly an overdose. She was paralyzed by a shot. She and Charles Gary and a group of so-called liberal leftists, Al Lowenstein, I did a tape on him, who was murdered recently. These people play this safe middle game, and they know too much, and then they get wiped out anyway. Mark Lane will probably meet the same fate. They pretend they're the left. They work with the deadliest teams. They profit from looking as if they're supporting the poor while they're taking in a mint and really profiting from the pains without fingerprinting the sources of the problem. And then they're murdered anyway. Faye was shot, paralyzed, and then found dead in Hong Kong. And many times I pleaded with her. I knew her personally, and she came down here at the time the Peace and Freedom had meetings, and pleaded with her, open up the assassinations, find out who's doing these killings. She could care less. She just turned her back on it. There's no such thing as a conspiracy. And then she's left in Hong Kong, dead as a dog, never having really stood up when it got really hard, when the decisions had to be made to expose the meanest. She withdrew and went into a private law practice and got out of the fire and ended up being hit anyway. When I look at this long list of sleazy cowards that are being gunned down, I am really proud that at least I stand up for what I believe in, and it doesn't matter where the chips fall. I'm not going to protect any given person. If they are criminals or act in a criminal way, I will continue to expose them. There was a book out. I've had it for a long, long time, and I referred to it a long time ago on the radio, and it's very pertinent to the headlines in many of the countries today. I can't follow with you everything that's going on in Korea or the borders of Israel and Iran and these various countries. But in summary, Karl Jaspers put it all in a book called The Future of Germany. He was a well-known philosopher in Germany, and he wrote a book on the future of Germany. And in that book, as I said, I've mentioned it way back on radio programs, but I don't know if you have it on the tapes, and you may want to get this book, buy it, or get it from your library. He talks about the problems of restructuring Germany after World War II and into the modern era. And then he goes into the Kennedy assassination, John Kennedy's assassination, and summarizing the end of his book. He said, nothing has made it so clear what America means to us as did the administration and the assassination of John F. Kennedy. For a moment, current issues around the globe became familiar. People, states, his total commitment to freedom or human dignity. He had a goal, which was peace. Of course, we all know that peace is a dirty word. Jasper said one man put a nation back on the track. The forces of their political morality emerged from hiding. The echo he found in the depths of American ethos raised people to their proper and higher level, and people began to come out of hiding and admit that there was a chance for peace. What happened then, Jaspers asked. America could produce this man, raise him to the top, then anonymous powers killed him. It was as if the devil intervened in history at that moment in 1963, November 22nd, 1963. At that moment, for a turn, the devil appeared. For 2 years, we had been breathing a new and different air in global politics for 1,000 days. The crime is unsolved. He wrote this 13 years ago in 1967. Politically, it's almost as fatal as the assassination itself. The American people as a whole have not mastered that dreadful event. Chief Justice Earl Warren said the truth of the murder would not be fully known to the present generation, which could mean only that the findings are contrary to the national interest and would never be made public. Carl Jaspers asked, since when has an American judge another duty other than to uncover the truth, the whole truth, regardless of anything but the truth? Those facts from the past and present should never be hidden. We want to know what is happening to us. That solution of the crime, if it's not pursued, is very dangerous. They could either face themselves, the United States, and the world as a country in which certain forces wanted such a murder and could get it perpetuated, even with the aid of government organs, or they could leave it obscure, the official version that Lee Harvey Oswald did it, that the crime was an accident. They chose the second course with the result that for a while the question remained taboo. This was from 1963 to 67. America is still America, and that issue will not stay dead. Jasper said several authors have published books on the investigations. People think about it. No one knows yet what happened. But after Kennedy's death, Americans seem to be backsliding into the gray world of purely pragmatic politics. They were about to forget Kennedy, and now the impression is fading also. Kennedy is not dead, and he goes on to say that the fate of the world depends upon knowing the fate of Germany, not only America. And I bring this up, Carl Jasper's book, because I don't want to talk about Carter or Ted Kennedy or the elections. The choices are so crummy. The candidates are so bad, whether it's Reagan or Bush. The result of that assassination is the kind of politics that Jasper said in 67 we would have. He said, should we turn away from the United States because for the moment there's a falsehood or the taboo of the Kennedy assassination? Should Germany and the world do that? He said to turn from that is as bad as the lies in the foundation of the European state, as our insistence that we were never Nazis. Jaspers concluded his book by saying the crux of the matter remains that whatever happens to America is happening to us all over the world directly. Even the Kennedy assassination concerns us, as does their failure to shed light on all its aspects. We only ask at such a time, what is the fullest possible use of human knowledge to enable us to do against such a catastrophe? What can we do? What is going on in America? He asked in 1967. This was before Robert Kennedy was killed, Martin Luther King and Medgar Evers and Malcolm X and so forth. The alarming changes in democracy, the transformation of a mass society under conditions as historically complex as the land that produced them, the growth of lies, all this becomes our fate as well. These lies are breeding and breeding. And he says today the future is more insecure than ever. You can imagine the insecurity of the Allies as we have elections and the Iranian crisis and so forth. Nobody knows whether the United States has any future at all, he said. Today, the future is more insecure than ever for every country and for mankind as a whole. Nobody knows whether the United States has any future. That's Carl Jaspers. And on the other side of this tape, I'm going to talk about some more about the Kennedy assassination. It was 13 years ago. Where are we today, and how has it affected our life? Jasper saw that in 1967. America, politics, our relationship to other countries, our breeding ourselves in lie upon lie has brought us to the point of total destruction, not only destroying us, but destroying masses of people all over the world. And had we solved that single murder, had we cared enough to solve that murder, we might have prevented other murders, just as if Mr. Jordan had cared enough about Whitney Young, he may have saved his own life. He might not have, but it would have been worth the task, just as Faye Stender had fought to find out the truth of the killing of George Jackson and the Los Angeles Police Department. It might have saved her life. Running away and hiding or staying dwarfed like little Oscar, isn't the solution, and Jaspers knew it. He predicted it, and that's where America is today. So on the other side of this tape, I'm going to continue on the legacy of the murder of John Kennedy. This is Mae Brussell, tape number 444. It's June the 6th, 1980, and it's side 2. There was a meeting this last May the 9th in Houston, Texas, of some very important people, each of them, or most of them, linking back to the assassination of John Kennedy, November 22nd, 1963, the day that Carl Jaspers said shook the free world, the world that wanted peace, and set us back into this dark age that we have today. The lead article is 100 Americans vow to raise $1 million each to spread the gospel. That's $100 million. The meeting of these people was in Houston, May the 9th, and the story was carried in Houston and Dallas newspapers. More than 100 of America's wealthiest and most powerful people have pledged to raise $1 million each. That's $100 million each in a $1 billion drive led by Nelson Bunker Hunk to save the world by taking the Christian gospel to every soul. About a year ago, at least a year ago, I mentioned a group of people led by Mr. Hunt that want to turn the entire world Christian. Well, whether you put the Jews in concentration camps and get rid of them, or other non-believers, or whether you ostracize them by the whole world being Christian and they are excluded, they're right then for persecution and harassment. These people have an organization called Here's Life World. There are 24 campuses. There's a Campus Crusade for Christian International Incorporated, and the organizers of Here's Life will not mention who the contributors are. It's set up by William Bright, a Christian who heads the Campus Crusade, and the Hunts had offered $10 million in the very beginning to get it started. One of the men behind this was Clement Stone, the man who put so much money into Richard Nixon's campaign and helped Dwight Chapin and various persons at the time that they were under investigation at Watergate, and hired them when they got out to work for his organization, the insurance company in Chicago and all over the world. The head of Holiday Inn was a member of this original group to turn the whole world Christian. But now they're surfacing. And in Texas, there was former President Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was on the Warren Commission and hid the Nazis and the conspiracy, the White Russian Tsarist conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. Also present was Special Prosecutor Leon Jaworski. Jaworski was at Nuremberg and was instrumental in covering up the majority of the Nazis, where a handful were hung and the rest were released. He surfaced at the time of the Kennedy assassination to conceal the conspiracy and Jack Ruby's role with Hunts and other oil people and the true criminals behind the killing of murder. He surfaced as a special prosecutor at the time of Watergate to conceal the links of Watergate to the Dallas assassination. He was the prosecutor for Koreagate, where everybody got off with a hand slap, and the money from Reverend Moon could be documented. Nazi money coming in from Germany to Korea and into the United States to buy off our congressmen. Leon Jaworski is a part of this group. astronaut James Irwin, and of course the Torbert document and other books have documented the role of Nazis and NASA, our space agency, in their role in various extreme right-wing positions in this country. The astronauts are political. Cowboy star Roy Rogers was there, football quarterback Roger Staubach, Terry Bradshaw, a businessman, W. Clement Stone was at this meeting, and Clint Murchison, Jr. That's one of the other persons, and I've mentioned many, many times the roles of the Murchisons. They had a controlling interest in Holt Reinhardt that put out Mark Lane's first book, Rush to Judgment, and I had accused Lane from very early years on, long before Jonestown, of concealing the Nazis and the Tsarists and the real people behind the assassination of John Kennedy. Another member of this team that turned Christian recently is industrialist Cullen Davis. In 1977, he was charged with killing his 12-year-old stepdaughter, but the Texas courts found him innocent of that. He was later charged with soliciting a murder of the judge in his divorce case. He was cleared of that. He had another trial. The jury cleared him again. Now he's become a Christian, and he's led by a group in Fort Worth, Texas, evangelists, and he's welcomed into this group. Clint Murchison, John Connally was there. He's a part of that. John Connally was Secretary of the Navy, Secretary of the Treasury, has property located in Tyrol Bay in Jamaica, and is closely associated not only with the assassins of John Kennedy, but as the governor of Texas, covered it up and had correspondence with Lee Harvey Oswald himself, knows that Oswald was in Navy intelligence, and has been part of this combine of corporations, the Galen operation, the ITT, the corporations that have done the assassinations and have taken literally control of our economy, of the news media, and allow these assassinations to continue. They don't blush or turn, and now they have combined their energy and their money to turn the whole world Christian. The pictures in the newspaper of Leon Jaworski, John Connally, Mrs. Murchison, and Nelson Bunker Hunt tell you a lot about where their minds are a few years after the murder of John Kennedy. Jack Ruby was at the offices of Nelson Bunker Hunt, and he worked as a front man for these people at the time that he shot Lee Harvey Oswald or Oswald's double in order to silence the real story of the assassinations. And Murchison is active with these people. They've pledged millions of dollars, $170 million recently, to go into the Philippines, the jungles of the Philippines. They're putting up $1 billion to spread a movie called Jesus. They're going into China. They want to make all of China Christian. This is one of their stories, that they want to turn all the Chinese into Christians. And the article says their film aims to teach, reinforce, and assure these poor people at China and elsewhere that if they let Christ into their lives right there, and if they die that very night, they will go to heaven. This is what the blacks were promised when they took Christ on the plantations, that they'd float on those pink clouds once they died, so never mind the fair shake that they get now. And the movie, as I say, Jesus, and all of the money is to go into areas, 100 million here and $1 billion there and another $1 million here. China, they say, is a future target for total conversion, and a Pray for China manual has been compiled to pray for the 900 million people in China and convert them to Christianity. The goal is to make the entire world Christian, and the very people like Gerald Ford, Leon Jaworski, John Connally, the Murchisons, Nelson Bunker Hunt were all involved in those days back in Dallas in 1963, and here they surface now with a goal that does not allow for differences of belief, but what will follow will be the repressions, the terror, the killings, the conversions, because these people control the silver market, the soybean market. They could cut off food that the poor need. They have all kinds of techniques and unlimited money and unlimited weapons. They're going to have another meeting in New York in September of this year, September 19th to 21. So you people in the East Coast, save all the newspapers you can on these meetings. They're as secret as the Bilderberger or Trilateral. The names of the people, except for these few, were not released. There'll be a similar meeting in Miami, January 23rd to 25th of 1981. And the goal is to go out into the world and give the word of Jesus all over the world. Now, they have a campus crusade. They started with $1 billion goal for 1982, and it will be growing. But they've broken down the kind of money you give if you, for 100 million, you can become a world sponsor. If you donate 100 million, you are a world sponsor. If you give just $50 million, he or she can become a hemisphere sponsor. For 25 million, you can be a continental sponsor. But if you're just a cheapskate and you have 25,000, you can support one missionary and a staff member out in the field as the gospel is spread. And the big shtick to the people they convert is that even if you die tonight, you go to heaven. So become a Christian now before you die, and don't fear death. This reminds me of Alternative 3 and all these other genocidal stories. It won't matter if you die because you'll meet Christ when you get there. The movie Jesus was released through Warner Brothers Pictures in the United States last fall. It's now in Latin America, Australia, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, and the Caribbean. And while it grossed $11 million, they're looking for $17 million to break even, and then they're raising millions of dollars to send this out in the world. They have what they call executive vision tours. Remember, this is church-related, so it's all tax-deductible. They have an African group that will go out and hopes to get 16,000 new followers a day on the continent of Africa, and then they give degrees, Masters of Art, Master of Divinity, Master of Ministry, and they have a crusade 24-hour hotline on the telephone out of Arlington, Virginia. There's one Christian embassy. They explained in the second part of this article that there are millions of people out there that are lonely, that are watching TV, that their lives are not full, they're unfulfilled, and that they turn to Christ overseas and nationally. Here the masses will convert to Jesus. So with a committee of 100 people giving $1 million each, that's 100 million, and then people like Bunker Hunt giving millions, billions to this, and Clement Stone and other groups, their goal was to raise, I believe it was $22 billion, and turn the entire world Christian within a few years. And all the main leaders and organizers out of Houston and Dallas are linked not only to the Central Intelligence Agency, but directly to the murder of John Kennedy in 1963, at which time the peace talks, the Entente was over. It began to be smashed when Eisenhower wanted rapprochement with the Soviet Union, and the U-2 came down and broke up the peace talks. John Kennedy's brother was not going to investigate organized crime that worked hand in glove with these people as the Attorney General. They were not going to integrate the schools and raise the earning ability and the education of the blacks in the South. They weren't allowed to pull back from Vietnam. They were removed physically and murdered because they would not invade Cuba for these people. And now these people have surfaced just 17 years later since Kennedy was killed and are on their crusade going forward with all the strength that they have. There was one little article in the newspaper this week, San Francisco Examiner, and one of the Los Angeles Times, that will interest people who have studied the Robert Kennedy assassination. The little 2-inch article says, Police Chemist Suspended. Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Department's chief forensic chemist, the controversial figure in the investigation of Senator Robert Kennedy's assassination, has been suspended for being remiss in his duties. It was disclosed Friday that 8 of Dwayne Wolfer's aides and subordinates have also been disciplined for improper conduct, including drinking on duty and firing pellet guns in their office or on the street. Dwayne Wolfer was the controversial man who mishandled the evidence of the second gun in the murder of Robert Kennedy, worked for the Los Angeles Police Department, went on to other promotions as the chief of the forensic chemistry division of the Los Angeles Police Department. But they're under so much investigation for their death squads, similar to Brazil, and for their shooting people on the streets, and for the mishandling of physical evidence, that they finally got Dwayne Wolfer out. What they got him out for was really the wrong reasons. He was remiss on his duties, and maybe they shot up the office, or maybe they drank on the job. But what he did with the criminal evidence of the murder of the senator and a candidate for office, that has never been fully opened up. But anyway, Police Chief Daryl Gates, who replaced Ed Davis in Los Angeles, has suspended Wolfer without pay, and they said he failed to provide proper storage and analysis of bullets and other evidence, and improperly supervised firearm and explosive investigations. So time finally caught up with Dwayne Wolfer. Not enough yet, and it certainly doesn't make the blazing headlights, but that man at least is suspended from the police department at the time being. But his boss, after John Kennedy was murdered and Robert Kennedy ran for presidential office in 1968 and was killed in Los Angeles, the boss of D. Wayne Wolfer was Ed Davis, chief of police in Los Angeles. Ed Davis won the GOP nomination for the Senate this week, as did the head Klansman from the state of California. The chief member of the Ku Klux Klan, an organizer from California, won the seat in the Assembly in the elections as a Democrat in the primaries yesterday. He has to run against a Republican, but if one's a Nazi, the other's the Klan. But he did win the Democratic nomination. But ex-L.A. Police Chief Ed Davis won the nomination for Senate in California. Former Los Angeles Police Chief Ed Davis won a bitter battle of conservatives for the Senate primary last Tuesday. He'll run against a Democrat. He'll have to face a Democrat from San Fernando Valley. But Ed Davis is a man similar to Himmler, Goering, Goebbels, and all of Hitler's henchmen put together, whether Bormann or Mengele or any of them. And none of these people that were involved in these political assassinations have even gotten so much as a slap on the wrist. You see G. Gordon Liddy surfacing, and Spiro Agnew, and John Mitchell's doing well, and Richard Nixon's living next door to David Rockefeller and traveling around the world and getting out a new book as if he were an elder statesman. Well, I have mentioned many, many tapes. Watch out for Ed Davis surfacing, and there is a man who has covered up murders in Los Angeles as chief of police and now wants to be in the Senate in California. Another man I've talked about on many tapes is Mike Curb, our lieutenant governor in California, the protege of Richard Nixon. He worked with Ken Reitz, and they had some nice secret money dealings in Washington, D.C., secret money in the desk of Robert Haldeman. They were linked to Watergate, and not only Watergate, but surreptitious counterintelligence, death squads. These people have links to evidence that has never been opened up on the primary witnesses of Watergate that were murdered, the shooting of George Wallace, the Chappaquiddick affair. Mike Curb is young. He's only 35. He's a millionaire. He is lieutenant governor, but now he's going to the Republican National Convention, and you're going to see his face night and day on television. And remember how long ago Mae Brussell told you he was climbing that ladder. I think of Reagan winning the nomination, which he literally has in his hands, for the Republican Party, and how in New York City at the Elgin Theater and on radio, various times I talked about Ronald Reagan having the power, the real power behind him, and how I've repeated this, but I don't know if I repeated enough. People said, watch Nelson Rockefeller. It's Rockefeller has the power. I would say it was Reagan. Well, Rockefeller's 6 feet under, but he's cremated anyway. He's not even there. But Mike Curb and Ronald Reagan have total power. Curb is going to be at the convention. He's young. He's good-looking. He'll be up on the rostrum all the time. He'll be on display all the time, primetime television. He can work himself up. He could be the governor of California in 1982. He could be a presidential candidate in 1986. He's very good-looking. He's capable. He represents the most conservative elements that there are in this country. A radio commentator was defending the right of the Klan to run for office. They said, you can elect, if that's the will of the people, you elect them in. That's how Adolf Hitler got into power in 1933. He was personable. The poor liked him. The women liked him. He was going to get full employment. He was against the corporations and Wall Street. And Hitler looked really good for a change for Germany. And he represented the will of the people. And Mike Curb is this very clean-cut, good-looking young person who was catapulted as lieutenant governor in California and now will be the chairman or host in Detroit this summer. You'll see a lot of Mike Curb on the television. Several weeks ago, I did a tape called That's Incredible, or the Awa Maru, the sunken treasures off of China that are being brought up by the Chinese government. And I mentioned the Glomar Explorer being built by our tax dollars and the CIA, and want to update with you a little article on Glomar, which was just in the Houston Post this last week. Whatever happened to Howard Hughes' Glomar Explorer? The article tells about the Glomar Explorer was one of the CIA's best-kept secret. Howard Hughes' organization agreed to use their name and use it as a cover for CIA plans. that it was designed to mine mineral and mineral-rich deposits in the ocean depths, and the veil of secrecy and tight security shrouding the ship was explained as a simple precaution against industrial espionage. This is from the Houston Post last week. Until 1970, from 75 until 78, the Glomar had rested at Suisun Bay, now a concentorium headed by Lockheed Corporation, which again is the CIA, leased the ship for the testing of deep-sea drilling, and now they're going to reconvert that ship. A group of people are going to take it for deep-sea, more refurbishing for deep-sea drilling. They're taking a $5 million budget from private industry, $5 million budget for private industry, and then they'll convert the ship, and maybe it'll cost them $700 million. But if they the ship was built by the United States tax dollars, then they'll add $700 million and bring up $2 billion. The simple mathematics, you can figure that out. Instead of giving the money back to the tax people, they're taking a ship that was built for the government by United States taxpayers and then convert it to their private business where they can do offshore drilling and engineering and scoop up the minerals from the sea. And along those lines, I mentioned that the ship could go outside of China or assist China in bringing up the treasures from the Awa Maru. There was also an article in the Houston Post. Chinese are licensed to make Howard Hughes tool bits. Officials of the Howard Hughes Tool Company and the China National Machinery Import-Export signed an agreement licensing the People's Republic of China to manufacture the Howard Hughes patent for drilling oil and rock bits. That was a private invention of Howard Hughes' father, and it belongs to the corporation, and they can now sell it. And they're going to work with China, with Prime Minister Deng. He's the man that's been talking about arming and making war against the Soviet Union. They'll build a plant in central China, the capital of their largest province, that's rich in oil and gas deposits, and they'll use the Hughes bit and that tool bit to start drilling for oil and other minerals, and they will have the equipment of the inventor, Howard Hughes' dad, for bringing up what they need in China in terms of oil and minerals, and they also can work with us, with the Glomar Explorer, to bring up the wealth of that ship that was taken from the Soviet Union to Manchuria, then to Japan, and then left outside the doorsteps of China just before the end of, right at the end of World War II. Remember how Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger went over to China and opened up trade with China. Well, immediately the Hughes Corporation sold $75 million worth of products to China starting in 1973, and they've been assisting them with their oil rigs and breaking into the soil, and in return the Chinese factory will buy from the Hughes Corporation, and we will begin to arm China, hopefully, to make war against the Soviet Union. All last summer, I worked hard to put the documentation together on the book that I'm doing on Lee Harvey Oswald, and I'm going to get back to that book. Hopefully, by the end of June, I'll be working straight through and get that book together. The research is all done, and the writing part I didn't want to put off till this summer, but the middle of the year is so busy, and I'll get back to the writing part. But a big part of that book, or the essence of it, is the story of the doubles of Lee Harvey Oswald. And of course, I supported the lawsuit of Michael Eddowes to dig up the remains of Lee Harvey Oswald, because I don't believe that Oswald is buried in that grave in Texas. Eddowes wants to prove it's a Russian spy. I think it's an imposter, but I don't know how you could tell by the skeletons that it's a Russian imposter. This is 17 years later, and I don't think that it's possible to know his nationality or what his brain was thinking by the bones that are in that coffin, although it might be possible after 17 years to find out that it wasn't actually Lee Harvey Oswald. But I support, of course, the lawsuit that Michael Eddowes has had. He's written several books on the subject, and he claims that that is not Lee Harvey Oswald in the grave. Well, just this last week, that lawsuit was stopped. There's just one small article in our newspapers, maybe your Texas papers have more, but from Fort Worth, Texas, it said the court will not allow Michael Eddowes to have this body exhumed, that this has been rejected. The Second Texas Court of Civil Appeals requested it, and the original ruling of the judge holds, and he is not entitled, Eddowes is not entitled to sue. I think the reason was that he was an American citizen, although I don't know why a group of Texas researchers, just on the basis of being denied their civil rights, of a war escalating after Kennedy was killed, and the possibility that an imposter was placed there, that even Lee Harvey Oswald could be alive, would be reason enough to bring up this body. But in the meantime, I never really did believe that there was ever a single chance in the world that that body would be brought up, because, again, it would be one more piece of the puzzle that would disprove that original lie that Earl Warren and the others foisted on us. There was an article in the San Jose Mercury about a new book coming out. The book is called The Undiminished Man by Janet Stevenson, and it gives insights into Earl Warren and his background, and tries to say that Warren wasn't specifically a champion of civil liberties. He's been painted as a great judge, a great champion of liberties, and Harry Farrell in the San Jose Mercury has an article, Pre-Court Days, Earl Warren was no champion of civil liberties. Well, he wasn't in his pre-court days when he was a district attorney in California, and he wasn't when he was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And his book shows some of the opinions of Warren, and specifically they go to the Pearl Harbor period where he pressed for the internment of the Japanese. And there's some quotations here, 2.5 months after Pearl Harbor. He went to Congress and told them that the Japanese were dangerous. This was the quotation: "The only reason we haven't had a disaster in California is that it is timed for a different date. Our day of reckoning is bound to come. I want to say the consensus of opinion among law enforcement officials of this state is that there is more potential danger among Japanese born in this country than alien Japanese born in Japan." And it goes on to say that Earl Warren had no monopoly on this kind of logic, and that Walter Lippmann also wrote about the sinister lack of sabotage on the West Coast and got into the act. Walter Lippmann is the journalist that I called while he was still alive, and said there was a conspiracy in killing Kennedy, and he said, if you gave me the volume number and page number, I'd hang up on you. And I said, well, I'll start and you hang. I read, and he hung up on me. Evidently, this book is going to show Earl Warren as a little bit less than the great champion of civil liberties. That was another facade. He was put in by Murray Chotiner, the man that discovered Richard Nixon. They worked with organized crime. They covered up the assassination. They worked together. He worked with Dewey as vice president. He ran in New York City as the Republican presidential candidate, and that was the first big election financed by the newly formed CIA from the OSS, again working with people from Resorts International and organized crime. So what better person could cover up the murder of John Kennedy than Earl Warren, who was serving his masters well through the years with his facade. Again, these phony liberals, these liberals that pretend that they're servicing mankind while they continue to dig the grave. Now that he's gone, finally, somebody is writing books about the kind of phony creatures we have to live with. They're worse than phony, they're fatal. Save all the articles you can get about the coup in Liberia, the killing of Tolbert there, and also stories of Libya and Gaddafi. I don't have time on these tapes right now to go into those, but I will at length, and by the time I do that, you may have thrown away some of the articles and thought they weren't important. So save those until we get to them. Albert Spears has been hired by ABC to help make a movie on the Third Reich. There was a demonstration in Los Angeles against this. ABC TV in Hollywood has retained Albert Speer, Adolf Hitler's Minister of War Productions, as a consultant for a planned series called Inside the Third Reich. This is a brochure that was handed out at Century City. Speer was sentenced to 20 years in prison by the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal in 1946 for crimes against humanity. His subordinates, including Fritz Sokol, were hanged for their role in the slave labor camps under Speer's direction. But Speer was allowed to be out, and now he's insulting the Jewish community by being a consultant. ABC TV movie on the Third Reich, Hitler's notorious head of war production, is not only able to publish books and lecture around the country, but he's assisting American broadcasting for their televised production of what happened in Germany. I also want to do a lot more with you. I mentioned just a few weeks ago the new Moon Treaty, the desire to take the minerals off the moon, and drug companies want to make drugs up there and steal in various minerals and not give the third world the idea that they would be able to share them. If they don't have the technology to get there, there's a fear that the United States corporations won't invest the money that's necessary if they have to share anything up in space, the minerals and so forth, with the third world. It's similar to the Western migration. They didn't share it with the Indians or the poor blacks, and they want to let it be known before they start exploring that they do not have to share this material with the third world. If they get up there first and put the money in, they shouldn't expect any of the profit from this adventure. The company that is taking care of the moon rocks, the mining metals and the minerals, and rewriting the moon treaty so that it doesn't belong to all mankind, but yet belongs to Kennecott Copper and other corporations. The head of that group is United Technology, and General Alexander Haig is president of United Technology. So these people whose names are in the news, who have worked with repressions and Nazis and organized the world for World War III, Haig was formerly the head of NATO, moved on to World Technologies, United Technologies it's called, where he can make sure that the world continues to be raped in space and outer space, and that the poor get no share of it. That's the same kind of thinking that Adolf Hitler had. It's the kind that he patterned after the American exploitation of Indians and blacks. General Alexander Haig, if he isn't vice president under Ronald Reagan, will continue to be president of United Technologies, and this group is rewriting the treaty to make sure that the corporations get the profits and that the moon does not belong to anybody except those people with the money to get up there first. Next week I will read to you a letter from Catherine Revlin, the woman who infiltrated the party we had last summer and helped William Taub write The Forces of Power. But in the meantime, I have to put away the unfinished business. There isn't time again. This is Mae Brussell in Carmel, California. You take care, and we'll be back together with more information to share about this crazy, mixed-up world. Until then.